Picture this. It's October 1847, and the morning mist is rolling off the Columbia River like some kind of ghostly curtain. Fort Vancouver sits there in all its frontier grandeur. TTA, this massive Hudson's Bay Company outpost that's basically the economic heart of the Pacific Northwest. And standing on the dock, watching another absolute disaster unfold before his eyes, is Tom Wakefield. Now, when I say disaster, I mean the kind of catastrophe that makes grown men weep and accountants reach for the whiskey. 40%. Think about that number for a moment. 40% of the Hudson's Bay Company's precious supplies have just vanished into the churning waters of the Columbia River. Gone. Swallowed up by the current because once again, the traditional rope lashings that everybody swears by have failed spectacularly. Tom Wakefield isn't your typical frontiersman, and that's exactly why this story matters. Here's a man caught between worlds in the most literal sense. His father was Scottish, one of those tough-as-nails traders who came west chasing fur fortunes. His mother was Nez Perce, part of a people who'd been moving goods through these mountains for countless generations before any European ever dreamed of the Pacific. Wakefield himself had spent 20 years. Think about that. 2 full decades, perfecting something different, something that nobody else seemed to understand or respect. You see, while everyone else was throwing ropes over packloads and yanking them tight with brute force, Wakefield had been developing what he called a diamond-shaped hitching pattern. And where did this inspiration come from? His grandmother's ancient basket weaving. Now, I want you to really think about this for a moment. Here's traditional Native American knowledge, AHEA, techniques passed down through generations of women who understood tension, pressure, distribution, and structural integrity in ways that would make modern engineers weep with envy, being adapted to solve the frontier's biggest logistical nightmare. But when Wakefield suggested his method to Factor James Douglas, the veteran packers didn't just dismiss him, they laughed. Actually laughed at what they called the half-breed's fancy knots. And listen, this kind of dismissal wasn't unusual on the frontier. The combination of racial prejudice and professional pride made it nearly impossible for innovations to cross cultural boundaries, even when those innovations could save lives and fortunes. James Douglas, though, now there's a man worth understanding. He's watching $60,000 in cargo disappear into rivers and ravines year after year, $60,000 in 1847 money, which translates to roughly $2 million today. The Hudson's Bay Company is bleeding money, and Douglas is desperate enough to consider anything, even advice from someone the old-timers consider an outsider. So Douglas does something that will echo through history. He proposes a wager. Not just any wager, but the kind of all-or-nothing bet that defines entire careers and changes the course of industries. The challenge is brutally simple and absolutely terrifying. Wakefield must move 5 tons of supplies through Hell's Canyon in November, when even the most experienced packers refuse to work because the weather turns the trails into death traps. The terms are stark. If Wakefield can deliver 90% of the cargo intact, AST, and remember, traditional methods were lucky to achieve 60% survival rates on good days, he wins exclusive military contracts. We're talking about a monopoly on supplying every army post west of the Rocky Mountains. But if he fails, he works 5 years without pay. 5 years. That's not just professional humiliation. That's economic slavery. Word spreads through Fort Vancouver like wildfire, and the crowd of skeptics grows by the hour. Mexican arrieros, who've packed silver through the Cuestiones, Sierra Madre Mountains are shaking their heads in disbelief. These are men who've spent their entire lives moving precious cargo through hostile terrain, and they think Wakefield is committing suicide. Even his own family, his cousins from the Nez Perce tribe, are warning him against challenging what they call the river spirits. But here's what makes Wakefield extraordinary. He's learned from everybody. From the Spanish arrieros, he's absorbed the fundamental principles of the diamond hitch, TIRCH, though he's about to improve it beyond recognition. From his mother's people, he's mastered waterproofing techniques that use natural materials in ways that would make modern chemists jealous. From his father's side, He's developed the business sense to recognize opportunity when others see only risk. Let me explain the technical difference, because this is where engineering meets artistry. Traditional packing methods used 2 ropes thrown over loads and tightened by pure muscle power. Imagine trying to secure a refrigerator to the back of a horse using only rope and hope. That's essentially what everyone was doing. Wakefield's diamond hitch created 4 pressure points that distributed weight evenly while allowing the load to flex with the animal's natural movement. Each knot could be adjusted independently without loosening the others. It was like the difference between a medieval catapult and a precision rifle. The waterproofing innovation came from cedar bark padding, traded from coastal tribes who'd been keeping things dry for centuries. This bark had an almost magical property. It swelled when wet, creating natural seals that kept moisture out. While everyone else was watching their flour turn to paste and their gunpowder become useless mush, Wakefield's loads would emerge from river crossings completely dry. As November approaches, Wakefield selects his team with the precision of a military commander choosing elite forces. 15 mules, not horses, because mules are smarter and more sure-footed in treacherous terrain. 3 horses for speed and mobility, and 5 men, including Miguel Chavez, an arriero who'd initially joined the chorus of mockers but possessed enough professional pride to recognize genius when he saw it. The atmosphere at Fort Vancouver is electric with anticipation and dread. Betting pools spring up among the traders and soldiers. Some wager on how many days Wakefield will last before turning back. Others bet on whether they'll find bodies come spring. The Hudson's Bay Company officials try to maintain dignified confidence, but you can see the worry in their eyes. They've just bet their entire Western operations on one man's untested innovation, and somewhere in the back of everyone's mind lurks the knowledge of what November means in Hell's Canyon. The Snake River carves North America's deepest gorge through terrain so hostile that even Native Americans traditionally avoided it during winter months. Freezing rain turns rock faces into sheets of ice. Trails become mudslides that can swallow a mule train without a trace. The river itself becomes a raging torrent that's claimed more lives than anyone cares to count. But Tom Wakefield has spent 20 years preparing for this moment, studying every technique, testing every innovation, and building the knowledge base that just might revolutionize how America moves goods through its most challenging terrain. As he makes final preparations, checking and rechecking every knot, every piece of equipment, every detail of the route ahead, one question hangs in the air like the morning mist. Will his grandmother's basket weaving patterns prove strong enough to conquer the most dangerous canyon in North America? The first day through Hell's Canyon tested everything Tom Wakefield thought he knew about moving cargo through hostile terrain. And folks, when I say hostile, I'm talking about a place that makes the surface of Mars look hospitable. The Snake River has carved the deepest gorge in North America right here. We're talking about walls that rise over 7,000 feet from the water's edge. To put that in perspective, imagine the Grand Canyon, but narrower, steeper, and filled with a river that wants to kill you. November had brought exactly what everyone feared, freezing rain that transformed every trail into a treacherous mudslide. This is why traditional pack trains avoided this route entirely after October. Smart money said you simply didn't travel Hell's Canyon in winter and expect to come out alive. But Wakefield's mules were carrying cargo that represented everything. Flour to keep mining camps from starving, gunpowder for blasting operations, medical supplies for frontier doctors, and $20,000 in gold coin. $20,000. That's roughly $600,000 in today's money. All loaded onto the backs of animals, picking their way along ledges where one stumble meant death. At Devil's Slide is the Trail I Devil Eyes. And yes, that's the actual name of this geological nightmare. The trail drops 800 feet in a quarter mile. Picture the steepest ski slope you've ever seen, then make it narrower, cover it with ice, and add a 1,000-foot drop on one side. Every observer expected disaster here. Hell, they were probably hoping for disaster, because watching someone else fail spectacularly is a lot more entertaining than admitting your own methods might be inferior. Instead, they witnessed something that would change everything. The diamond hitch held firm, as mules literally slid on their haunches down slopes that would challenge a mountain goat. Watch this carefully in your mind's eye. Traditional rope lashings would have loosened under this kind of stress, spilling cargo across the canyon floor. But Wakefield's four-point pressure system allowed loads to shift and flex without ever loosening the core restraints. It was like watching a master craftsman's furniture survive an earthquake while cheaply made pieces fell apart. Miguel Chavez, that arriero who'd initially mocked Wakefield's methods, found himself crossing himself and muttering prayers as his mule, a tough little beast named Santana, navigated ledges where one wrong step meant a 1,000-foot fall into churning rapids. Chavez later described it as watching his mule dance with death while carrying a piano on its back. The man had packed silver through the Sierra Madre, survived Apache raids, and crossed deserts that had claimed entire expeditions. But he'd never seen anything like what the diamond hitch could accomplish. The cedar bark padding proved its worth when they reached the river crossings. Now, the Snake River in November isn't some gentle stream you skip across on stepping stones. We're talking about a raging torrent filled with snowmelt and winter runoff, running fast enough to sweep away a horse and rider in seconds. Traditional pack trains had to unload everything, wrap it in whatever waterproof materials they could find, carry it across piece by piece, and then reload on the other side. The process took hours and guaranteed losses. Wakefield's team forded the Snake River 17 times. 17. Each crossing meant trusting their lives and cargo to animals, struggling against currents that could dash them against rocks without a second thought. But not a single grain of flour got wet. The cedar bark padding swelled on contact with water, creating seals so tight that modern plastic containers would be jealous. Watching those loads emerge from the river bone dry must have seemed like witnessing miracles. Word traveled faster than the pack train itself through what frontier folks called the Moccasin Telegraph, the Native American trading networks that connected tribes from California to Canada. These communication systems moved information across vast distances with speed that rivaled the Pony Express. By the time Wakefield's train was halfway through the canyon, tribes hundreds of miles away had heard about the revolutionary packing techniques. The psychological impact on his team was extraordinary. Think about it. These men had signed up for what everyone considered a suicide mission. They expected to lose half their cargo, probably some animals, and quite possibly their lives. Instead, they were witnessing their leaders' methods working so well that the impossible was becoming routine. Morale doesn't just improve in situations like this, it transforms men into believers. When they finally emerged from Hell's Canyon after 6 grueling days, hundreds of people waited to see the results. James Douglas himself, that hardened Hudson's Bay Company factor who'd seen every kind of frontier disaster, personally inspected every single load. The man who'd been prepared to write off Wakefield's experiment as expensive folly found himself staring at something that defied everything he thought he knew about: frontier logistics. The final tally stunned everyone present. 98% of cargo delivered intact. 98%. The only losses came from a single mule's stumble that claimed exactly 2% of the coffee beans, and even then, Wakefield's quick thinking and rope work prevented the animal from going over the cliff. Traditional methods were lucky to achieve 60% success rates on easy terrain in good weather. Wakefield had just achieved near perfection in the worst conditions imaginable. Veterans who'd spent decades mocking the half-breed's fancy knots now begged to learn. And I mean literally begged. Pride goes out the window when you're watching your livelihood revolutionized before your eyes. The Yakama tribe sent their best packers to study the technique. Hispanic arrieros recognized elements of their traditional methods but marveled at the improvements Wakefield had made. Within months, the Wakefield diamond spread through every major trading post west of the Rocky Mountains. But this wasn't just about copying a technique, Ikomo piece. It was about revolutionizing an entire industry. The economic impact was immediate and staggering. Insurance rates for pack trains dropped by 70% virtually overnight. Mining companies that had previously written off half their supplies as frontier tax suddenly found remote operations profitable for the first time. The military took notice when Colonel George Wright reported that Wakefield-trained packers had moved artillery pieces through terrain, previously considered impassable for anything heavier than a man on foot. Think about that. Cannons being transported through mountain passes that had defeated every previous attempt. The implications for westward expansion were enormous. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Wakefield's success forced the frontier establishment to acknowledge that innovation could come from anywhere, from the fusion of different cultural traditions, from people they'd dismissed as outsiders, from techniques they'd mocked as primitive. The diamond hitch became proof that the future belonged to those willing to learn from everyone, not just those who looked like them or shared their prejudices. As 1848 dawned, Tom Wakefield found himself transformed from frontier outcast to the most sought-after logistics expert west of the Mississippi. His company, registered as Cascade Pack Services, grew from 5 employees to 300 within 2 years. But the real revolution was just beginning, because the California gold rush was about to test his methods on a scale that would either prove their worth forever or destroy them completely. And that's when things got really interesting. The 1850s marked what historians would later call the Diamond Hitch's Golden Age, though nobody at the time realized they were living through a revolution that would reshape the entire American West. The California Gold Rush of 1849 brought approximately 300,000 people flooding westward. Imagine. The entire population of modern Pittsburgh suddenly deciding to walk to California, and you'll get some sense of the scale we're talking about. All those people needed supplies: food, tools, medicine, clothing, mining equipment, whiskey, TAP, the list was endless. And here's the thing that most people don't grasp about the gold rush. It wasn't just about finding gold. It was about creating an entire supply chain capable of keeping hundreds of thousands of people alive in a wilderness that had previously supported maybe a few thousand Native Americans and Mexican settlers. Traditional packing methods would have meant starvation in the mining camps. Think about it. If you're losing 40 to 60% of your cargo to river crossings, mudslides, and equipment failures, how do you keep remote communities supplied with basic necessities? The answer is simple: you don't. Without Wakefield's revolution in cargo transport, the California gold rush would have been a humanitarian disaster on an unimaginable scale. Wakefield's disciples now numbered in the thousands, and they were keeping goods flowing across a continent. These weren't just American packers anymore. The technique had spread through every culture involved in westward expansion. Mexican arrieros adapted it to their traditional methods. Chinese immigrants learned it to supply their mining operations. Native American tribes incorporated it into their trading practices. Former slaves heading west mastered it as a path to economic independence. The most legendary journey of this era began with Juan Rodriguez, one of Wakefield's first students, and a man whose story deserves to be remembered alongside any of the great explorers. Rodriguez led a pack train carrying $50,000 worth of mercury from Vera Cruz, Mexico, to Sacramento, California. $50,000. That's roughly $1.5 million today, all in the form of mercury flasks needed for gold processing. The route covered 4,000 miles through some of the most challenging terrain on the continent, and Rodriguez delivered every single flask intact. But the journey that really captured the nation's attention began in Independence, Missouri, on April 1st, 1852. Wakefield himself, now 51 years old and at the height of his fame, personally led 200 mules carrying mining equipment specifically ordered by California senators. The newspapers called it the Miracle Drive, and they weren't exaggerating. 3,000 miles in 4 months with zero cargo loss. Zero. To put this in perspective, traditional freight wagons were lucky to complete the journey with half their cargo intact, and that was in good weather. Wakefield's train moved through spring floods, summer heat, early winter storms, and every natural disaster the continent could throw at them. And they delivered everything exactly as promised. At each river crossing, crowds gathered to watch loads emerge dry from water that had claimed so many traditional trains. The Platte River in Nebraska, which had swallowed countless wagons and their contents, became just another obstacle to navigate. The Green River in Wyoming, notorious for its swift current and hidden rocks, posed no more challenge than a city street. The Humboldt River in Nevada, which had been the graveyard of so many dreams, couldn't touch Wakefield's perfectly packed loads. What made this even more remarkable was the cultural fusion that accelerated as the technique spread. Shoshone packers added their own innovations, using buffalo hide in place of cedar bark when traditional materials weren't available. The buffalo hide actually proved superior in some conditions, being more durable and flexible than any other natural waterproofing material. Mexican arrieros introduced ceremonial blessings for pack strings, combining Catholic prayers with indigenous traditions that recognized the spiritual connection between packer, animal, and cargo. These weren't just quaint customs. They reflected a deep understanding of the psychological elements that made dangerous journeys successful. Perhaps most significantly, women found roles in an industry that had previously excluded them entirely. The diamond hitch's emphasis on precision over brute strength meant that skill and knowledge mattered more than physical power. Mary Chinook, a Warm Springs woman whose story has been criminally overlooked by most historians, became the first female packmaster in the American West. Mary Chinook didn't just break barriers, she shattered them completely. Leading supply trains to army posts throughout Oregon Territory, she achieved efficiency rates that exceeded most male packers. Her secret wasn't just technical skill, though she mastered every aspect of the diamond hitch. She understood animal psychology in ways that amazed even experienced muleteers. Horses and mules trusted her instinctively, following her through terrain that would terrify animals working with other packers. The United States Army formally adopted Wakefield's methods in 1855 after a series of tests that proved traditional military packing was not just inefficient but actually dangerous to operations. Lieutenant Philip Sheridan. Yes, the same Sheridan who would later become a Civil War hero, ICC, wrote in his official report that the diamond hitch revolutionized military logistics in terrain where wagons failed and traditional packing meant certain disaster. But the technique's greatest test came during crises when lives hung in the balance. The harsh winter of 1856 brought blizzards that stranded multiple wagon trains throughout the Rocky Mountains. Traditional rescue efforts failed repeatedly, as supply trains couldn't reach survivors through the deep snow and treacherous conditions. Wakefield's packers, however, moved through those blizzards like ghosts, delivering food and medicine to people who had given up hope of rescue. Sarah Winnemucca, the famous Northern Paiute writer and interpreter, later described watching Wakefield's mule trains as an almost supernatural sight. They moved like spirits through snow that stopped everything else, bringing life to those the winter had marked for death. President Franklin Pierce presented Wakefield with a special medal in 1857, recognizing how his innovation had conquered the unconquerable wilderness and bound our growing nation together with bonds stronger than steel. The ceremony in Washington attracted representatives from every Western territory, Mexican officials, and tribal leaders who had seen their traditional roots revolutionized by this fusion of cultural knowledge. By 1858, Cascade Pack Services employed over 800 people across the Western territories. Wakefield had established training centers in Santa Fe, Salt Lake City, Sacramento, and Portland, where packers from every background learned not just the technical aspects of the diamond hitch, but the cultural respect and fusion that made it possible. The economic numbers tell only part of the story. Insurance companies calculated that Wakefield-trained operations saved the equivalent of $3 million per year in lost cargo. Mining operations that had previously been economically impossible became profitable. Remote army posts that had struggled with supply shortages found themselves adequately provisioned year-round. But perhaps the most important impact was social. The diamond hitch proved that innovation emerged from cultural fusion, not cultural dominance. It demonstrated that the future belonged to those willing to learn from everyone, regardless of race or background. In a nation still struggling with questions of expansion, identity, and inclusion, Wakefield's success offered a model of what America could become when it embraced the knowledge and contributions of all its people. As the 1850s drew to a close, Everyone assumed this golden age would continue indefinitely. The demand for efficient packing seemed endless, the profits were enormous, and Wakefield's methods had proven themselves under every conceivable condition. But lurking on the horizon was a technological development that would change everything: the Transcontinental Railroad. And with it would come the greatest test of whether Wakefield's revolution could survive in a world increasingly dominated by steel rails and steam engines. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10, 1869, should have been the death knell for pack train operations across the American West. After all, why struggle with mules and mountain trails when a steam locomotive could haul freight faster, cheaper, and more reliably than any animal-powered operation? Most observers expected the great pack train era to end with the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Summit, Utah. Tom Wakefield, now 62 years old and graying at the temples, led his final commercial train to that very celebration. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The man who had revolutionized pack transport was helping to celebrate its apparent replacement. Wakefield's mules carried champagne for the festivities and the ceremonial spikes that would symbolically unite the continent. As he watched Leland Stanford swing the hammer that missed the spike entirely. Yes, that really happened. Wakefield must have wondered if he was witnessing his own obsolescence. But here's what separated Wakefield from ordinary businessmen. He possessed the kind of foresight that comes from understanding technology's limitations as well as its capabilities. Since 1865, he'd been quietly establishing pack training schools, meticulously documenting his techniques, and preparing for a world where railroads couldn't reach everywhere. His prediction proved remarkably accurate. The railroad connected major population centers and followed relatively gentle grades suitable for locomotives. But the American West contained vast areas where steel rails simply couldn't go, mountains too steep, canyons too narrow, terrain too rugged for any engineering solution of the era. These places still needed supplies, and they still needed the kind of precision packing that only Wakefield's methods could provide. The United States cavalry discovered this reality almost immediately. The Apache campaigns of the 1870s and 80s took place in landscapes where wagons were useless and railroads impossible. Desert mountains, slot canyons, mesas accessible only by narrow trails. This was terrain that demanded pack animals, and pack animals loaded using techniques that wouldn't fail when lives depended on them. Cavalry units trained in Wakefield methods achieved supply, reliability rates that amazed military planners. When traditional packing failed, soldiers died of thirst or starvation in country that offered no forgiveness for logistical failures. But diamond-hitched loads delivered water, ammunition, and medical supplies with clockwork regularity, even through Apache territory where every shadow might hide an enemy warrior. The Spanish-American War of 1898 provided an unexpected test of Wakefield's techniques in completely different conditions. Cuban jungles presented challenges that neither the American West nor traditional military training had prepared soldiers for. Humidity that rotted leather, mud that swallowed wagons, vegetation so thick that machetes couldn't clear adequate trails for wheeled vehicles. Once again, pack animals proved essential, and the diamond hitch proved superior to every alternative. Mules carrying supplies to troops fighting in the Cuban mountains delivered everything from artillery shells to medical morphine with reliability that kept American forces operational when other armies would have collapsed from supply failures. World War I brought the most dramatic validation of Wakefield's legacy. Mountain divisions preparing for combat in Italy's Alps sought out elderly Native American packers who had learned directly from Wakefield himself. Joe Medicine Crow, a Crow elder in his 80s, spent weeks teaching young soldiers techniques he'd mastered as a teenager working for Cascade Pack Services. These weren't just historical curiosities or romantic throwbacks to frontier days. Modern warfare in mountainous terrain demanded the same precision and reliability that had made Wakefield famous 70 years earlier. German mountain troops were some of the best-trained soldiers in the world, but they couldn't match the supply efficiency of American units that combined modern weapons with ancient packing wisdom. The Forest Service recognized the continuing value of these techniques and adopted diamond hitching as standard practice in 1905. firefighting crews discovered that Wakefield-trained packers could deliver equipment to forest blazes that no vehicle could reach. Even today, when helicopters and modern technology dominate wildfire response, pack animals remain essential for delivering supplies to remote fire lines and evacuation camps. The technique survived through every major American conflict of the 20th century. Korea's mountains demanded pack animals for frontline supply. Vietnam's jungles required the same precision that had conquered Hell's Canyon. Afghanistan's peaks in the 21st century saw special forces units using diamond hitching to move equipment through terrain that would have been familiar to Tom Wakefield. But perhaps the most touching legacy lies in civilian applications that Wakefield never could have imagined. Wilderness therapy programs discovered that teaching troubled youth to properly load and care for pack animals provided lessons in responsibility, patience, and precision that no classroom could match. The careful attention required for diamond hitching, where one loose knot could mean disaster, translated into life skills that helped young people develop focus and self-discipline. The National Park Service maintains pack strings for trail maintenance in roadless wilderness areas, still achieving efficiency rates above 90% that modern methods struggle to match. Park rangers carrying supplies into the backcountry of Yellowstone, Glacier, and the Sierra Nevada use techniques that would be instantly recognizable to any 19th-century packer trained in Wakefield's methods. Modern scientific expeditions to remote locations rely on these same principles. Antarctic research stations receive some supplies by pack animal during brief summer seasons. Archaeological digs in roadless canyons of the Southwest depend on pack trains to move equipment and artifacts. Even NASA has consulted pack training manuals when planning equipment transport for lunar and Martian missions, recognizing that the basic principles of balanced loading and secure fastening remain constant, whether you're crossing Hell's Canyon or the surface of another planet. Tom Wakefield died quietly in November 1873 on his ranch overlooking the Columbia River near Pendleton, Oregon. He was 76 years old, ancient by frontier standards, and had lived to see his innovations spread across continents and adapt to technologies he never could have imagined. His funeral drew thousands of mourners from every corner of the West. Native Americans from dozens of tribes, Mexican arrieros who had learned his techniques, Chinese merchants whose supply lines depended on his methods, army officers whose campaigns had succeeded because of his innovation, and railroad executives whose trains connected with pack routes that still used his diamond hitch. They buried him on a hill overlooking the Columbia River, where his revolution had begun 26 years earlier. The headstone, carved from local granite, bore a simple inscription: Thomas Wakefield, 1827 to 1873. He taught the mountains to carry civilization. Today, visitors to that hillside find an unusual sight. Diamond-hitched stones left by modern packers honoring the man who transformed how America moves essential supplies through its most challenging terrain. These aren't museum pieces or historical reenactments. They're working tools left by people whose livelihoods still depend on techniques that fused Scottish pragmatism, Spanish innovation, and Native American wisdom into something greater than the sum of its parts. From Afghanistan's mountains to Alaska's wilderness, from scientific expeditions to disaster relief operations, the diamond hitch continues to move critical supplies where nothing else can reach. It remains a testament to one man's vision of cultural fusion, a proof that the best innovations emerge not from isolation, but from the willingness to learn from everyone who has knowledge to share. In our modern world of global supply chains and instantaneous communication, it's easy to forget that the most reliable methods often have the deepest roots. Tom Wakefield's legacy reminds us that lasting solutions come from understanding both technology and tradition, from respecting both innovation and heritage, and from recognizing that the future belongs to those who can learn from the past while adapting to challenges not yet imagined. The diamond hitch survived because it solved fundamental problems that transcend any particular era or technology. As long as humans need to move essential supplies through terrain that challenges conventional methods, as long as precision and reliability matter more than speed or convenience, Tom Wakefield's revolution will continue to prove its worth in mountains, jungles, and wildernesses. Yet, to be explored.